Let's get started. So my neck is in good enough shape that I'm able to start grading papers. I still have ways to go, but I've at least gotten started. I'm working in reverse alphabetical order this time because I went in alphabetical order the last time. So I'm sorry for the A's out there. But I'm probably on Thursday. I'll give you the rubric for the final draft. It's going to be quite a bit less than it normally would have been as a result of how just behind I am with everything. My hope is that I'll have all of the papers graded by the end of the weekend. So that should give you a good, because you can turn the paper in whatever you want next during the final exam week. I don't really care. And so that should give you a good 2 weeks to work on it. And like I said, the requirements will be a little bit less. It'll probably be something like 9 to 10 pages as opposed to 10 to 15. So, which is what I was originally planning on. So hopefully that should be close enough that that's not too overwhelming for anyone. Again, I apologize for how long it's taken me to get back to you all, unfortunately. Let's see, any other business. So today's our last daily assignment. We'll have some short little readings that we'll do, but no more daily assignments going forward. So congratulations on that. You're done. It's another thing I have to finish grading, but I'm close to getting caught up with those. I only have a few of those left to get caught up on. And I've dropped the 2 lowest daily assignments. If you see like a box in orange or whatever in Canvas, that means that assignment got dropped, as it says in the syllabus. So yeah, once I do get caught up with these papers, everything should be pretty much accurate grade-wise. So yeah, any questions for me before we dive in? Any questions on the business end of things? All right, then yeah, let's finish up with Kierkegaard today. Yeah, we're not gonna get through all of Fear and Trembling, but we should be able to hit the big sort of pieces of it. Remember that our sort of overall goal for this last couple stuff we're talking about is we want to look at another possible account of what religion is that understands religion in terms fundamentally of a kind of experience, right? And these experiences get characterized really differently in different religions, but they all might well point to a different kind of experience, and maybe we can use that as some sort of foundation. And then the last author we're going to read, William James, that's what he's going to do. His book is going to be called The Varieties of Religious Experience, and indeed his goal is going to be to sort of see religion as a sort of different kind of experience, a unique way of experience, and try to group together some of the stuff. We had looked at some of the Buddhist versions of this, some Islamic versions of this, and then I wanted us to look at some Christian versions of this, and I thought Kierkegaard would be a good source. So that's, Kierkegaard's goal is not to define religion. He does not do that anywhere at all that I'm aware of. The closest he comes was in Today, where he defined the experience of Abraham as the experience of religious terror. So religion is a particular kind of terror or anxiety. Perhaps that is the thesis, or maybe more precisely, seems to be pointing to at least the Christian religion, at least, seems to be a certain kind of relationship to the absolute or to something transcendent or whatever. We'll try to unpack this today. Yeah, so that's the sort of just overarching, what are we doing with Kierkegaard? Why are we reading him? How is he helpful? The thing that I think is most interesting about Kierkegaard is how he's framing the problem. I think the way he's framing this is fascinating. He's not saying Christianity is right. He's saying that if what he's saying about Abraham isn't true, then Christianity doesn't make any sense. That's not the same as saying that what he's describing is a real thing. He's being intellectually honest. He's just like, this is the thing. If there is not a teleological suspension, if there is not this absolute relationship between the individual and the absolute, then yeah, none of this makes any sense, right? Might as well just all be pagans at that point, because the pagans could do everything else. Right? Part of the thing I haven't read Fear and Trembling in a while, actually. Something that was really cool that I've discovered is all of the stuff that he's saying is stuff that actually, if you go back and read the Roman pagan anti-Christian texts, it's all the same stuff that they complain about. Basically the Roman anti-pagan anti-Christian texts are all like, Christians are crazy, and like for the exact same things that Kierkegaard is saying that, yep, that's what Christians think. So it's actually like super cool. If we had more time, or that we weren't in the middle of a pandemic and I could have spread things out a little bit more nicely, I might actually, next time I teach this, have people read Kelsis's Against the Christians, because it's actually be a fascinating counterpart to what Kierkegaard is doing, just how much Kelsis hates all the stuff Kierkegaard is pointing toward. So it's a fascinating sort of locus, I think, for some interesting stuff. We read Kelsis in Medieval Philosophy, if anyone's interested. It's a fascinatingly weird text. Yeah, so okay, so that gives us a little bit of framing. I'm hoping, just remind ourselves what we're doing. The thing I really want to hit hard today is what he means by this kind of like personalized relationship with God. Right? That is supposed to be the justification for everything, and that the experience of which is the central experience. So that's what we're going to focus on. I have sort of a nice little Hegel way of beginning, and then we'll sort of try to complicate it, play with it a little bit. Yeah, we're getting near the end of the semester. I'm going to start winding down things a little bit. James is relatively easy compared to some of the other stuff we read this semester. So we're going to start winding down a little bit, playing with some ideas for the remainder of the way. That's my plan. So anyone have any sort of initial thoughts, comments, anything? Remember, you can also use the chat too. All right, then let us dive in to the relation between the individual and the universal. Here's how I want us to start. So let's talk from the standpoint of ethics first, because that's what's getting teleologically suspended. Right? All right, how is the individual related to God, related to the universal from within ethics? So, okay, first of all, we've got the absolute. This is a good Hegel word. Just translate this in your head as God. We don't need to worry about why he's calling, why either Hegel or Kierkegaard is calling this the absolute. Let's just God, say God, fine, right? Or the source of all things, whatever. Right? God gives rise to an ethical order. And to duties. So you want to sort of draw the diagram. We've got the absolute. We've got ethics. Thou shalt not kill. Use that as an example. And then we've got the individual. And it's important, right? I might want to do some killing, right? I might be an individual who's someone's pissed me off, and I'm feeling like doing a little killing today. Or maybe no one's pissed me off, and I'm a Greek berserker, as Nietzsche would have it, and I just feeling like killing some people today, right? Like, it's entirely possible this individual is defined on this level as something with a whole bunch of preferences that have no innate relationship to morality or ethics. And so from the standpoint of ethics, what I need to do is suppress my individuality, right? All these various arbitrary preferences that I have to conform to this sort of universal ethical rules. And so that's why Kierkegaard, again, he's just following Hegel on this, is just as content to call this level the level of the universal as he is the ethical. So good so far? None of this is super weird, right? So like God is sort of like the source of this, but how do I relate to God as an individual person? By not killing, right? My relationship to God is, on this standpoint, mediated through the universal or through the ethical. I'll put it in quotes, I love God insofar as I in fact refrain from killing. And, so on for the other commandments. My love kind of reduces to obedience. And so I'm not really directly related to God at all. I'm related to these rules. Right? I so quote unquote love, right? But actually the only people I'm related to are the people I'm refraining from killing. And again, or whatever other commandment. Right? The ones that I turn the other cheek to, or the ones that I, love, or whatever, right? All right. So how are we doing? Again, good here. Any questions so far? Yeah, Magnus, go ahead.
So I guess I was curious, in his sort of discussion of the absolute, is it fair to say then that Kierkegaard is like an idealist?
That's a difficult question to answer. It's not unfair to say that he's a very weird idealist.
Okay.
A very weird ideal. We would have to add in the very weird one. But it's not obvious that he is wildly outside of German idealism in content so much as in method.
Okay.
And we'll see why when we switch from talking about ethics to talking about the faith. But so all of this is sort of the method of German idealism. This is how German idealism characterizes things, and he's fine. He has no objection to any of this. All of this is true. It's just not the highest. There's a higher. So did that help? Any other questions?
No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome. Good. All right. Then let's switch now. So let's put ethics to one side. Now let's do faith. Right. Faith, Kierkegaard said, is the exact opposite. We begin again with the absolute. I am directly or absolutely related to the absolute. This absolutely related is a pun, is a Hegel pun, but I think it actually, without going into precisely again why Hegel's talking about the absolute, I think something of the sense is getting in. It's absolute insofar as it's unmediated. What's mediated is the universal or the ethical. That is mediated by my relationship to God. All right, so what does that concretely mean? Let's try to sort of unpack, because that's like, okay, fine, but what are we actually talking about here? What can we make this more concrete? Yes, we can. In ethics, I love my neighbor because that's what God tells me to do. In faith, I love God, and so my neighbor gets loved through God. I mean, you could almost like even more blasphemously sounding. You could almost like put God below below the I here, in a very weird sense. But here's what's weird. The sense of me that was below the ethical is not the same as this I that's above the ethical. This is a new sense of who I am. So actually, there's not the conflict between faith and ethics that there first seemed to be. You must first attain the ethical level, and only once you've attained the standpoint of ethics is faith possible. So it turns out that it's the exact opposite of what Hegel said. Hegel said you begin with faith but evolve past it to the standpoint of universal. Kierkegaard's like, nope, it's the exact opposite. You begin with ethics, then move past ethics to the standpoint of faith. All right. So what does any of that mean? We can do the schematic stuff, right? It's important. Yeah, I wanted to draw you the diagram and stuff. Like that's all helpful in its own way, I suppose, right? Okay, what does any of that mean? Let's go lower level. If I was to tell one of you, hey, I'm thinking of killing my kid. So let's say you decided not to call the police immediately. You wanted to try to talk me out of it. How would you try to talk me out of it? What would you tell me?
It's wrong.
It's wrong. Yeah. And so what would that mean, though? Be more. What would it mean to say that it's wrong? Because sure, that's right. I don't disagree. But make it more concrete than that, right? Like, why shouldn't I do it? Right? Maybe someone said they would ask me why I want to murder my kid. But if let's make it more concrete. So if my response was, I don't know, he's just really pissing me off today. It's really, really annoying me. That's why.
I would appeal to your
really feel like it.
I would appeal to the sensibility that it's going to be way too much trouble trying to evade the police for so long, having to deal with all the guilt of that.
That's boring though, right? You go consequentialist with it. But like, no, I got it all figured out, right? We're going to go up on top of this mountaintop. I'm going to trick everyone into thinking I'm just sacrificing a goat. And then say, Isaac, you fell down the mountain. What can you do? It's easy. Don't have to worry about it. Don't care about that consequentialist stuff.
He's your kid. Why would you want to kill your kid?
He's annoying me. I told you. He's pissing me off.
You could appeal to some sort of like supreme rational principle that it'd be simply illogical to kill your kid. And you must obey. Yeah.
I guess we can go more basic than this, right? Like, wouldn't you basically say, like, it doesn't matter that you want to kill your kid, you still shouldn't? Right? Like, rubber hits the road. Isn't that, like, the response? Right? Like, you can want whatever you want, Paul, right? No one will blame you for what you want, so long as you maybe keep it quiet, at least. But, like, you shouldn't act, and you shouldn't just do whatever you feel like, right? Like, if someone, like, flips you off in traffic and I want to run them over, I shouldn't actually do it. That would be wrong. And again, that's kind of like, I'm trying to be, like, on a super basic level here because it's, like, actually worth noting the super basic level. The most basic level of ethics is that sometimes you want to do shit that you're not allowed to do. And so, therefore, if ethics is a thing, maybe you say ethics isn't a thing, but if ethics is a thing, sometimes you shouldn't do stuff you want to do because it's wrong, right? The wrongness trumps my desire. Yeah, Brittany, go ahead.
So in this example, are we conflating murdering your child with the like religious excuse of basically what Abraham did with Isaac, or are we just saying?
No. I am pre-Abraham. In fact, I'm pre-ethics at this point. If I'm like, okay. Yeah, like I haven't even attained the level of ethical understanding, let alone what Kierkegaard thinks is going on with Abraham. Right? Because my hope is for all of you, it's obvious that if you want to kill someone, that doesn't mean you should do it.
So I suppose I guess one thing that I'm wondering is, in this example of yours, is there doesn't seem to be any really like religious tie-in.
Nope.
Like you as the person ruminating on, course of events, murdering their child, you're not really thinking that you're divinely motivated by the absolute. It doesn't benefit the universal in any way, shape, or form. So I don't know, like how I don't know. This is more of a, I guess this is an ethical experiment.
Right.
It is more of a religious musing.
We're on the level of pure ethics here. That's exactly right. Right. And on the level of pure ethics, if you needed to teach me pure ethics, rubber hits the road, your answer is going to have to be, it's wrong, don't do it. It doesn't matter that you want to do it. You still can't.
So, I suppose one thing that you'd have to keep in mind is what is, according to your system of, formulating your system of ethics, what is justifiable? Like, is your child being annoying a justifiable cause for murder? At what point do you hit the threshold of, that's justifiable?
And we don't, and that's fine. That's a fine question, but we don't actually even need to worry about that question right now, because the specifics aren't what's actually important here. At least that's what I'm trying to do with this example anyway, is not really get the specifics. What I'm really trying to do with this example is instead get the structure of ethics itself. So whatever, throw in Kant, go consequentialist at me, throw in some utilitarians, like whatever ethical system you throw in, at some point, your answer to me saying, I want to kill my kid is you can't. Right? It's going to have that force to it. Right? And it's not just going to be like me that can't. Your answer would be universalizable in some sense. That's why we're calling ethics universal. Right? Like everyone has this thou shalt not kill. Right? Everyone has it. That's the sense in which it's universal. Anyway, we talk about different contexts, different solutions, right? Like, again, that's why I make it like more specific. Like Kevin was saying, I think last class, it should be thou shalt not murder, maybe. Fine, right? But again, don't get caught up on the specifics, because the specifics aren't the point. The point is that at some point, part of me evolving as a member of society is realizing I can't do whatever I want. Sometimes I want stuff, can't do them, right? And again, this is like both ethical and social, because those are intertwined as Kierkegaard is using the term, right? Like how I deal with being angry might well vary in different contexts, but nevertheless, in all of those different social contexts, there are going to be restrictions put upon my behavior. Some things are allowable, some things aren't. Right. Good so far. I want everyone with me at this point. Okay, so if we're good so far, then let's go to the next sort of step of this. All right, so if I'm on that ethical level, I can sort of like now decide how to act, and I can sort of explain myself to other people, right? It'd be weird, but like if one of you, I don't actually have a kid, but let's say I did. If one of you was like, hey, Paul, why have you not killed your son today? Super weird question, but I could easily explain it, right? I could either say I don't want to, right? Understandable. Or I could say I do want to, but it's wrong, right? So I'm not doing it. My choice will be entirely intelligible then, right? My refraining from killing will make perfect sense. You can understand it. Conversely, if I did kill my child, so let's say I'm Agamemnon or something, and he said, Agamemnon, why did you kill Iphigenia? That's horrible. And Agamemnon was like, well, yes, it is horrible. I really didn't want to do it. I was really opposed to it, right? But it was necessitated by the political good of the Greek peoples. Whether you agree with Agamemnon or not, you understand what he means, right? You can understand like, oh, okay, he thought he was subject to such and such universal ethical rules, so he had to do something he didn't want to do, kill his daughter, right? But we all have to do things we don't want to do. Why did he do it? He did it because of some other universal ethical rule. Right? And so he sort of was in the situation where he had a conflict between his desires on the one hand and his various ethical rules on the other. And he just sort of like decided on the highest. That's right. And just like Brittany's saying in the chat, that's exactly right. He would be acting in accordance with and to the benefit of the universal, right? The moral ethical order. Even if we don't agree with his specific choice, even if we would decide you should have given up your kingdom rather than killed your daughter, we can at least like conceptualize what he's doing in terms of how it fits within the sort of universal schema of the ethical, political, social. Good so far? All right. First thing I want to solve. Brittany, did you have a hand up still, or is this just the old raised hand?
Oh, so sorry.
Oh, that's right. That's right. All right. So first thing we need to know, I want to note, I mean, we said some of this before, but I'm hoping I'm making it like more vivid now. None of this applies to Abraham at all. Right? Does Abraham want to kill Isaac? Nope. He has no desire. So he's not, again, go back to the diagram, right? Abraham is not at this level at all. He is not asserting, well, I want to do it, so I don't care what the rules say. Nothing of that sort, right? He has, if you want to think of this as sort of like stages of human development, he has evolved past, if you want to put this, maybe this first one is sort of the child phase, right? He has evolved past the sort of child phase of just thinking he can do whatever he wants to. He is at the ethical phase, right? He recognizes that it indeed would be wrong to kill Isaac. But not only that, he also doesn't want to kill Isaac, right? So here, there's no tragedy. There's no Agamemnon here, right? He doesn't want to do it. And everything says don't do it. Nothing in the universal, right? None of these ethical rules. There's no ethical rule by which you should kill your son because you heard a random voice in your head. That's not a thing. Right? None of you would accept that as a principle, as an ethical rule. Right? And so nothing is compelling Abraham to act. Right? He's not in a tragic situation. Okay, so where's the compulsion coming from? Well, Kierkegaard says it's coming not from the universal, it's coming from higher. God says to him, and again, Kierkegaard, I think rightly, forget the epistemological worry. How does he know it's God? Just don't worry. Put it to one side. It's not really relevant to what Kierkegaard's talking about here. When Abraham hears what he interprets as the voice of God saying, Abraham, sacrifice Isaac to me. Sacrifice your son to me. Right? That voice is not, again, we're assuming he's not crazy, right? That voice is not him wanting to kill Isaac. That voice is not ethics. So what is that? What could that voice possibly be then? Because it can't even be like, well, you should do whatever God says as an ethical rule, because God said, don't kill people. That, again, you should do whatever God says, that puts it back on the ethical level. And it's not. Like, God says don't kill people, actually. God's, as people have often jokingly noted, God's really straightforward about this. He's not mincing words. Don't kill people. So at what level, then, is this taking place? It's taking place on a personal level. This is Kierkegaard's claim. God is not speaking as the voice of ethics. God can't be speaking as the voice of ethics when he says sacrifice Isaac. That's not what the voice of ethics says. God has to be speaking to Isaac, or speaking to Abraham as a concrete individual person, not as a child and not as an ethical subject. And that's the key here.
So I've got a little bit of a question, and we'll
Go
see
ahead.
if my migraine-addled mind can phrase this. In what instance, because God in this example is directly contradicting tenets of the faith that are going to come to pass. So is it because these commandments haven't been passed down yet that he's like, the system of ethics being kind of negotiable currently? Or is it because the intent of God was never to have Isaac's sacrifice, that it was a test all along? Is this why it's justifiable? I guess from a godly omniscient standpoint, at what time does something like that become justifiable to violate the ethics? And does it muddy the water for everybody else to ask this question, but pass down commandments that say, just don't do it, as a blanket example?
So there's two different questions that are sort of at stake in the question you're asking. They're both good. They're both important. But I want to make sure that they're kept distinct. There is what justifies God in saying this, and what justifies Abraham in believing it or acting on the basis of it. And those are very different questions, actually, right? What justifies God? The fact that God's omniscient and already knows everything that's going to happen, right? Like the fact that like God knows what's going to happen. It's very important, again, that God, in fact, does not intend for Isaac to die, and all of that, right? So what justifies God? God's omniscience, his omnibenevolence, his omnipotence, right? Like him being all powerful, all knowing, all loving. That's what justifies him. So put that off to one side for a second. So leave if you want to put it this way, leave God out of it for a second. Leave why is God doing any of this aside. The thing that Kierkegaard calls more about is what justifies Abraham in going along with it. That's the question and that's more related to sort of what you were saying, right? Like, because sort of like, what should all of us take from this story? Right? That's sort of like what justifies Abraham. And the answer is quite literally, this is going to be so weird. Can I say this without in any way clear? Not exactly. Okay, I'll say it and then we'll need to clarify it because it's going to sound bizarre. What justifies it is God and Abraham's relationship.
I don't think that's actually bizarre at all, because I think that perfectly explains the fact that they had a cultivated relationship, Abraham and God. This was not something he just woke up one day and was all like, yo, I've never talked to you before. Go slay your son because I tell you to. That
exactly.
Wouldn't be nonsensical. I think the only reason that Abraham has even, and I think I mentioned this maybe last class too, was that in Abraham's mind, perhaps he thought, well, God has made these assurances about my son and then their kingdoms that they shall inherit. And perhaps that some part of his brain thought, surely this is not what's actually being asked of me. I do believe that this is a test and I'm going to act accordingly. But like, who knows? We kind of go back to Kierkegaard and his postulations.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly what Kierkegaard, in a sense, that's exactly what Kierkegaard thinks. It's just you also have to add into that. So that's one, if you want to put, that's one side of his mind. The other side of his mind is, I am going to kill Isaac. It just has to be, both of those have to be there, and that's the paradox. Right? The paradox is that he trusts that God will do what God said, and he's going to do what God has told him to do. Both of those. And what justifies both of those? Nothing, except their relationship. It's not justified by ethics, because ethics just says, no, don't kill people. That's the Kant thing that I've been joking with. Like, Kant's response to this is just like, I don't know if you're God, but I know I shouldn't kill, so nope. Turn it into an epistemological problem, right? But Abraham's not in that position. Abraham knows it's God. How? We don't need to worry about it, right? Abraham has a real relationship with God. That is the only thing that could possibly justify his actions, his behavior. Think about it like, let's go super, like, again, we talked about things like this before when we were doing Al-Ghazali, actually. Like, what justifies your relation, how you act with your friends? It's kind of your relationship with your friend, right? Let's say you and your friend have a relationship where you like tell sort of like biting jokes to one another. What justifies that? the only possible justification that that could have. Because in the abstract, that just sounds awful, right? Like people who are cruel to one another, right? Like the only thing that could possibly justify that is your actual relationship itself. And from the outside, you are not going to be able to explain that to anyone else. That can only be justified within the relationship. Insanely, the only one to whom Abraham can justify his killing Isaac, or kill, not again, he doesn't actually kill Isaac. That's super important to this story too. But justify doing what he did is to God. He and God can be justified in it. No one else can. That is religious terror. That should be a horrifying idea. Doing an action that there is no possibility of you ever justifying to anyone else except yourself and the other person who you're related to. Yeah, Brittany, go ahead.
So does this, I suppose that kind of ties into what Kierkegaard is saying in one of the readings today, which was, as an agent of faith, you are liable to being radically misunderstood and misinterpreted, and that's kind of just a consequence of being an agent of faith, of being a knight of God, essentially, is that that's something that you kind of have to just deal with.
And the word you said, radically misunderstood, that's exactly right. In the literal meaning of the word radical is to the root. So getting down to the root of something, that's a radical. That's right. You are being radically misunderstood. You are being misunderstood at the very root. Constitutively, there is no possibility of understanding of Abraham. There's no possibility. The other example uses is Mary. There's no possibility of understanding today Mary.
Yeah, and I think that can, kind of be extended to other biblical tales as well. Like I'm thinking about Moses and, the burning bush and all of that. I think this is kind of an experience that I'm curious if we were to get all these individuals together, because as Kierkegaard was kind of postulating, even amongst other agents of faith, you are prone to still being misunderstood because they are not walking in your exact shoes. And I can't help but wonder, if we were to get all these people together in the same room, what would that conversation look like? Would they think that they're all insane, or?
Well, that's the thing that's really interesting, though, because let's use Moses as an example. Kierkegaard actually does not think Moses has true faith. Indeed, that's actually kind of the point of the Moses story. Moses dies before he gets to the Holy Land, because because his faith doubted for a moment. And so you all might not know the story, so let's actually go through the story, because this is actually here. He brought this up, I believe, last reading, so this is relevant to Kierkegaard too, right? So the story of Moses is basically like Moses is tasked with doing a job, and he does it. It's an impossible job. He's given all these powers to do it, so he's actually like in a way better position than Abraham. Like Abraham is not given magic powers. Moses is, right? But there's one time in the desert when the people are starving, when the refugees are starving. And so Moses, using his magic powers, he's going to tap a stone and make water comes out. And he taps it twice and water hasn't yet come out. And so he hits it a third time. And for that, he dies before he gets to the Holy Land. Right? Because his faith was shook in that moment. He did not have the sort of insane, I said last time, or Kierkegaard said last class, like if he had killed Isaac, Abraham would have spent the remainder of his life waiting patiently at home for Isaac to come through the door. Right? I think we actually can understand Moses as a tragic hero. And the Bible kind of tells him that way. He's kind of a tragic hero. He's kind of a tragic figure. We can sort of understand his moment of doubt, right? We can understand why he breaks the calf and the golden calf and all. I think actually, as far as Kierkegaard is concerned, he chose Mary and Abraham quite purposefully. I think those are indeed the two knights of faith that he would point to from the Bible. There might be elements of it in other people, but the two who never falter. And again, the never faltering, and what was it for Mary, of course? The never faltering for Mary is, no, I'm a virgin, actually, and still pregnant. And again, that's impossible. Just like Sarah's going to give birth was impossible. Mary, it's not Mary giving birth that was impossible. It was Mary giving birth and being what she said she was. That was impossible. And again, Kierkegaard's like, so imagine the fearful trembling that she was in. Right? It's easy for us now to be like, oh, what a holy, sacred mother. That's not her experience. Her experience is the anxious, fearful trembling within the impossibility, believing in the impossibility. Again, why? Because God said so. The only thing that could justify that is the relationship. Yeah, and Joseph's interesting. Kierkegaard doesn't talk about Joseph, at least, so I don't know where he would classify him. But yeah, at the very least, yeah, I mean, certainly, at least within like most of the traditions, people care more about Mary than they do about Joseph. Joseph comes up, but Mary tends to be the one people are more into.
So I'm sorry, I have another question, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So where does this concept of faith by extension, because oftentimes you have people who they themselves lack the faith, but they have faith in the person who believes in, you know, God or what have you. So yeah, yeah,
right.
So,
that's
yeah.
him. That's what he says he is, right?
So, like, at what point does that satisfy God? I guess if you're saying that Moses, having just momentarily faltered, are the standards different? What's going on? Why are the standards different?
Again, that's a different question than the one that Kierkegaard's asking, because you're basically asking, like, does Moses end up in hell or whatever? And that in a very real sense, I don't think Kierkegaard cares. I think that's beside the point for this essay, at least. I think the question that Kierkegaard calls about is who is a true knight of faith? It's not Moses. Maybe now, maybe not everyone can do that, right? Maybe, again, we saw when we were talking about medieval Catholicism, the whole idea was that not everyone was going to be fully religious, right? That you would have an exemplary class that sort of does the work that sort of like does the work, and everyone else kind of supports them, but they are sort of like lesser in their faith, right? We saw that the Protestants were super not into that. At least Luther and Calvin anyway, right? And indeed, I think Protestantism in general is super not into that sort of complementary levels of society where the thing that's saved is the church, not individuals. Right? But regardless of how we feel about that, who's the religious one? The religious one in the preeminent sense is Abraham or Mary. Right? And maybe they're dragging the rest of us sinners along, right? But they're the ones who had faith in the proper sense. And again, maybe there was others too. I mean, he didn't say it listed as an exhaustive list or whatever, but it's actually just really interesting that Moses isn't it. Moses is held up as someone who doubted, who at best, who is more of a tragic figure than the knight of faith. All right. Did anything we just do help? Is it getting a little bit like the sense of personal relationing here? Is that's the thing that I'm really trying to get better at, get us closer to, clearer at, because that's the thing that's weird here. The basic logic of like Kierkegaard is laying out here is that like by becoming related to God, there's a literal sense in which you become equally important to reality as God. There's another sense in which you're not. So want to flag both of those senses, right? But there is a sense in which, and again, this actually, we could look at Job as an example of this. You remember, you all know the story of Job. So Job it's actually similar to Abraham in a sense. Job is characterized as a man with faith. Kierkegaard doesn't mention him, at least in Fear and Trembling at all. But Job is indeed characterized as a man who had true faith in the Lord. Then all this terrible stuff happens to him, right? And Job's response to this terrible stuff is he basically spends the entirety of the book being like, God, why is this happening to me? He's not saying it was unjust that it's happened. He just said, God, why? Answer me. Why is this happening? Why are you doing this to me? Right? And his like whole family dies, and he like gets boils, and like he's in like constant pain and agony, right? And he doesn't curse God. His wife is actually hilarious. His wife literally says to him, "Just curse God and die already." And no, he does not curse God. He does not say that what's happening to him is unjust or that it's wrong. He just says, "Why is this happening to me, God? I know I didn't do I didn't do anything to deserve this. I didn't do anything to warrant this." And then his friends come, and his friends are like, "Well, you must have been a sinner. God must be punishing you for your sin." Right? And then Job is just insistent. Is like, "No, I don't think I am. Like, I don't think I can't find anything that I did to justify what God is doing to me." And so he and his friends go back and forth. And at the end, eventually God comes. This is actually a real theophany, an instance of God directly appearing in the world. God appears, and people miss this. So God spends about 20 pages yelling at Job. And the way he yells at Job is not by saying, "You are a sinner, Job." He says, "Job, did you make mountains? Did you make the mountains, Job? Did you create all the animals? Do you know why I did anything that I do?" And Job's continual response is, "I've said too much, I will remain silent." Fine. So God spends about 10 minutes yelling at Job. And then he turns to his two friends, or three actually. He turns to Job's three friends and says, "Why aren't you more like my man Job?" Who he's just spent 10 pages excoriating. Right? Why weren't you more like my man Job? Because indeed, Job was entirely within his rights to ask God why this was happening. He just couldn't expect an answer. But he had the standing to ask God for these things, right? And indeed, what God actually says is like, I'm really pissed at you three. Like, you better ask my man Job for forgiveness, or you all are gonna get it, because he didn't do anything. He's not a sinner. You're a sinner for assuming that good things only happen, that bad things only happen to bad people, because that's not how this works. Right? So you better ask him for forgiveness, and if he prays really hard, maybe I'll forgive you idiots. Right? There is a very real sense in which, and again, this is the thing that makes Christianity and maybe Judaism no other tradition is like this. And Kierkegaard said that today. Nothing like this is true outside of Christianity. It's not how the pagans were related to their gods. It's not how anyone in Hinduism is related to Brahman. Right? There is a very real sense in which you are so important to God that you are equal to God in the relationship. And then there's also, of course, no, obviously you're not. It's both. There's both of those things are simultaneously true, right? No, you're not. Go live in the ethical level, right? This doesn't mean you get to leave ethics behind. You also got to go live down here too, right? But there is a very real sense in which there is a kind of equality. And that's what it means to say that God loves you. Not that God loves God, which basically is literally how Aristotle defines God is God loving God. And it's basically how the Hindus define Brahman too, is that Brahman is just thinking about Brahman. No, God's thinking about you as individuals. And faith is being able to live in how horrifyingly insane that would be. If the absolute actually cared about you as an individual. Because it's actually kind of comforting if God's just like, yeah, I'm thinking about me and I've given you all the tools, so you all do what you do. That's nicer, right? If God's like, no, I'm staring at you right now. Well, then we get the title of the book. The title of the book comes from one of the letters of Paul from the New Testament. Work out your salvation in fear and trembling, for it is the Lord who works in you. being able to live within the anxiety of that, the separateness of that, kind of the individuality of that, that is faith. And there is no going beyond that. Right? You never, you can never give up your fear and trembling. And but if any of you know anything about existentialism, yes, this becomes Sartrean authenticity. Cut out God and you have Sartre's version of authenticity in all of this, the being a radical individual. An absolute subjectivity. How we do? Is this working? Is this making any sense? Because it's super weird, and this is not how people normally talk about Christianity. But at least for Kierkegaard, like, so much the worse for how people talk about Christianity. Like, people don't normally talk about this when they talk about Christianity, but that's because they're not taking it very seriously. He thinks that's at least his stance on the matter, right? And again, I want to spend the rest of the class talking about the line from the Gospels that he quotes, from Christ, where Christ says, "Whoever follows me must give up father and mother, child, brother, sister, and hate all of them." That would be another line from the Gospels that people don't talk about that much. But Kierkegaard wants to take deadly seriously, and that's the experience he's pointing toward here. The experience is that experience, the experience of feeling oneself personally related to God. So a transcendent experience. Are we doing okay? Any thoughts, any questions, any? All right, let's talk about sacrificing things then. Let's end there, and that'll probably be a good place to end our discussion of Kierkegaard with is some human sacrifice. There's a line that frequently gets said, that the Christian God is a jealous God. Again, it's one of the things that Celsus hates, maybe the pagan stuff. This is actually what Celsus is like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, that God would have a hint of jealousy within him. What does that mean? The jealousy of God is that God demands that you love nothing but God. Or maybe let's put this slightly differently. God demands that you hate everything that is not God. That might be a better way of putting it, Kierkegaard thinks. He wants to play with it. Okay. Does Abraham hate Isaac? In what sense is that true? Okay. So what's the superficial and obvious answer to this question? Nope, not at all. Not in the slightest, right? Indeed, we're told he loves Isaac more than anything else in the world, and that in the world is quite important there. Less obvious answer. Yes, he's going to kill him. Kierkegaard is never going to let us forget that Abraham is also a murderer. Or at least, like, if he's not one, it's not clear why not. You should be deeply troubled by the question of whether or not Abraham is just a murderer. The fact that he didn't actually commit the crime is sort of besides the point. He intended to. But then here's the paradoxically crazy answer. So we've got the obvious answer, the less obvious. Now let's see the paradoxically crazy answer. No, because Isaac would not be a worthy sacrifice if it was not true that he loved Isaac more than anything else. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a sacrifice. You have to sacrifice what you love more than anything else. What you love more than anything else? I don't know. Maybe father and mother. Maybe brother and sister. Maybe child. We have to remember with all of this, this is the sense of I that's after ethics, not before ethics. Right? If you just don't love your mother very much, if you're just like, I kind of hate my mom, you're not a candidate to be following Christ anyway. If you're just like, I don't particularly care for my kids, I just sort of like have them, like I just sort of send them out into the world, you're not a candidate to be following Christ anyway. Right? That's the bizarre thing in all of this, right? You have to actually love these things to even be a candidate to follow Christ in the first place. Right? To make the sacrifice to God of them. The central paradox in all of this, and this is the central paradox of Christianity in a very real sense. By giving up what you love, you get it back even better. Which is to say, you get it back through and with God. So now, Abraham doesn't just love Isaac more than anything else in the world. Loving Isaac through God, he loves God absolutely, infinitely. Because he loves God absolutely, infinitely. And that's why Kierkegaard can't imagine being Isaac. We talked about this last time. The only kind of sacrifice Kierkegaard would be one where you sort of just decide that Isaac's just not that cool anyway, and so you're just going to rest content in God. Getting Isaac back, but better, that's the move of faith. That's the God loves individual people. And that's the sense of what we were talking about earlier, the sense in which the ethical becomes mediated through your relationship with God. It's not that those ethical rules suddenly become like optional. It's that now you're not just like merely doing what God commanded you to do when you love your neighbor. Now you love your neighbor because holy literally, holy God, it's God. It's God through my neighbor. Right? And so it's now not following a universal rule. It's now an expression of your absolute relationship to the absolute God. But to all the world, it's going to look like you tried to kill your son. And that doesn't go away. And that's Kierkegaard's interpretation. I mean, in brief, that's Kierkegaard's interpretation of this passage from the Gospels, right? And that is sort of the key to unlocking the interpretation of what's going on in the Abraham and Isaac story, he thinks. That experience, and again, you could easily say that experience isn't a thing. Fine, Kierkegaard says, but then stop pretending that you are a Christian. Because that experience is what makes Christians Christians. He thinks. That's his claim. How are we doing? Is this making sense? Or again, making sense in the sense of being super paradoxical? Making sense in the sense that you get the paradox of all of this? Yeah, Magnus, go ahead.
So, obviously, Kierkegaard is coming from I believe, a Lutheran-ish kind of...
Yeah, pietist Lutheran, a version of pietist Lutheranism, yeah.
Yeah. How well does this interpretation of the Abraham and Isaac story jive with just sort of like other strokes of Christianity? Like, do you think that this is really dependent on his sort of cultural interpretation of Christianity, or?
It's a fair question, and indeed Christianity admits of many interpretations, so I don't want to speak too strongly. I will say this is exactly what Celsus hates about Christianity. And I feel like your critics know you. I feel like your true critics know you pretty well.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. And indeed, like St. Augustine says things that sound a lot like this, too.
Okay.
Aquinas says some things that hint in these directions, too. If you're the kind of Christian who's going to take all the really disturbing stuff that the Old and New Testament say seriously, something like this seems to be the interpretation that gets given. Because you can give like, a Neoplatonic slant to this. You can give a nominalist slant to this, right? Like you don't have to be a German idealist to do this.
Yeah.
Even though he puts it in the German idealisty kind of language. To me, and I fully admit as someone who's not Christian, right? But to me, but I have studied Christianity, I think, a pretty large amount. And this does seem to be the thing that makes Christianity different from the other traditions that exist that I've seen. He seems to be on to something to me. At least, yeah. It seems like he's pointing to something here that is meaningful and is part of the reason why when you read the old stuff of Romans talking to Christians, they really have a hard time talking to one another because they cannot get into each other's headspace. Origen basically just assumes that Celsus just has to be a demon worshiper for not understanding this. And Celsus assumes that he has to just be a madman for thinking that God loves him personally. In that way, at least in this way that we're talking about. That's just crazy to think. And Origen just assumes, like, by not thinking that, you obviously just worship, like, devils. Like, your gods are obviously just devils because they don't love you like that. Like, they don't stand in this relationship of love to you. So, and for what it's worth, at least the subsequent tradition, at the very least, thinks Kierkegaard is someone you've got to deal with. Even people who maybe want to, like, tone down some of this, you still have to deal with what Kierkegaard is doing here. He becomes a pretty seminal figure in the interpretation of Christianity. And again, I don't know that all of this isn't already in St. Augustine. I mean, Augustine seems to say a lot of this two just differently, not using the Hegel language, but a lot of the framework seems to be there in St. Augustine already. So I don't know if that answered your question exactly, but at least
yeah, no, a lot.
Awesome. Any others? I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess like I feel like I could like ramble more, but I don't know if rambling anymore would help. So yeah, I mean, are people left with puzzles? Are people left with? I mean, you should be. That's the whole. I mean, maybe we could say this. Maybe here's one thing I hadn't talked about. So let's talk about why Kierkegaard says that faith is identical to passion. Because that might be a helpful, another helpful, or at least interesting way of sort of thinking about this. Something very odd happens. Whether you are a Christian or not, whether you believe God exists or not, you all stand in an absolute relationship to God. The very absolute relationship to God that Kierkegaard is talking about. That's why Sartre can be an atheist existentialist and not change, and basically just change the words but keep the entire framework. Because if you think you are in no relationship with God whatsoever, there is no ethical justification you can give of that either. That is you taking a stance, you being related to God in some sense, being related to God in the sense of a nullity, right? Or whatever, right? Like whatever, like if you hear all of this and you want to just be like, well, the pagans were right, this is all nuts, right? Fine, that is you adopting a relationship to God. And this is what he calls, in other places he calls this passion. He calls it passion here too, but in other terms he makes passion rather than faith the central term. Kierkegaard's basic overall philosophical project is to suggest that this passion that he's talking about is prior to all rationality and all ethics. So basically faith, what he's calling here, is prior to rationality and ethics, because you reason and act ethically on the basis of your relationship to the absolute, whatever relationship you posit to the absolute. If you're Epicurus and you decide that you're just going to let the gods do what the gods do and the gods are going to leave you alone, that is your passion, that is your faith, and that is then the foundation of your ethics and the foundation of your rationality and your reasoning. And indeed, in Epicurus, that is indeed exactly the case. Everything in Epicurus' system is predicated upon him thinking that gods exist, but they don't care about us at all. They are completely indifferent to us. And so Kierkegaard would say that is Epictetus' passion. Not Epictetus, Epicurus. That is Epicurus' passion. That is Epicurus' faith. Right? And we're all just more or less explicit about that. Right? We all just like more or less pretend we're doing something else when we're doing that. Right? And the Knight of Faith is the one who just does it. Who's like, yep, there is no justification that can be given. There is no defense I can give to this. And again, in Sartre, this just becomes authenticity. This just becomes, this is the me that I choose to be, with no justification, no defense, no anything. Right? The me that's prior to the ability to articulate why I'm it. The radical freedom that's at the core of human experience or human subjectivity for both Kierkegaard and Sartre. And Kierkegaard at least calls this passion. Right? The radical freedom to be related to the absolute in whatever way you want, including thinking that there is no absolute. Yeah. Did that help make it worse? make it more paradoxical, more bewildering? Yeah, good. Magnus.
I guess this is just one last question I had, since I think this is our last day of Kierkegaard. The very last page, in the epilogue, he goes on and talks about Heraclitus.
Yep.
I've taken an ancient Greek class and I still don't understand what he's talking about here, with the Eleatic thesis that denies motion. Can you explain what he's talking about?
Okay. Can you stick around for 5 minutes after class?
Totally.
because that's going to be a tangent that maybe other people don't want to be involved in.
Okay.
We're going to have to deep dive into Parmenides. Yes, I can. So, well, does anyone have any questions that aren't involving me having to teach a class in ancient philosophy to answer first? Because yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. So, any last questions? All right. Well, then go forth in fear and trembling. I guess perfect for 2021, right? Go forth in fear and trembling, and anxiously orient yourself toward a world that's that you are absolutely beholden to, I suppose. All right. So for next time, I haven't posted the reading yet, but it'll be relatively short. I'm just going to give you a few little passages from William James to read, just of him talking about different kinds of religious experience. And then that we'll just use that to start working our way toward the end of the semester. So that'll be the plan for next time. Awesome. If no one's got anything else, thank you all very much. Have a wonderful couple days, and I'll see you all on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah, and anyone who wants to talk about Heraclitus and Parmenides, stick around and we can do that if you want. All right, so let me try to answer this question. Okay, so and you can unmute yourself. It's fine now. There's not aren't that many of us left. So okay, when Heraclitus says, one cannot step into the same river twice, right? The logic of that utterance is basically that like everything is constantly in flux, right? Nothing is such that it can be said to endure maybe over time, right? Everything becomes something new. So importantly, in what Heraclitus is, people frequently I think pretty radically mischaracterize Heraclitus, and apparently Kierkegaard agrees with me. The kind of radical flux that Heraclitus is talking about is flux of things. There's the logos, which is not in flux in Heraclitus, and he's very straightforward. He says that, but there's the logos, right? Yeah. That does not so the river becomes other without becoming not a river.
Yeah.
Right, and that's important because if the river became not a river, then you couldn't step into the river. Then you don't step into the same river even once. Right? There is no river to step into because it's changing so much. Everything is in such radical flux.
Yeah.
What Heraclitus' students read him as saying is no radical flux. Everything is in flux in every respect. And what Plato shows in the Theaetetus, this is my dissertation. So that's why I was like, this is why we were going to go off a crazy tangent here. What Plato shows in the Theaetetus, I think rightly, I think this proof is undeniable, is radical flux means that change no longer even makes sense as a concept. Change only makes sense if it's change amongst, put it this way, motion only makes sense if there's something at rest against which you're measuring the motion.
Okay, that seems kind of Kantian almost.
Or Kant's being Platonic.
Fair.
Possibly, but yes, that's right. That's right. I mean, and so like the radical, put it in Kantian terms, the blooming, buzzing mass, like that's not anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't admit of change. It doesn't admit of all the stuff Hume was talking about, because all the stuff Hume was talking about presupposed some stable standpoint from which you can judge the flow.
Yeah.
Right. And so saying that you can't step into the same river twice presupposes rivers. It's just a different river every time. Right? The river never remains at rest. The river is, but to be a river does remain at rest.
So
to say that you can never step into the same river, the same that you never step into the same river, not even once, that's Parmenides again.
Yeah. So would that be like saying, I guess, is the supposition then that Heraclitus would still hold on to some type of like substratum for things?
It's very hard to say because Heraclitus is not clear.
No,
but he says the logos, right? Like those who don't know don't talk about don't grasp the logos of things.
Yeah.
I think Plato kind of reads Heraclitus as a friend of the forms.
Yeah, man, everyone's a friend of the forms to Plato,
That's
so
not false. As is Parmenides to Plato too.
yeah.
Of a sort, friend of the form of the sort. But that like, yeah, like I think the way this is how he puts it in the Theaetetus at least. If Heraclitus makes sense, which Plato thinks he does, unlike his students who Plato don't think make any sense. Plato thinks his students are all nuts. But
Yeah.
if Heraclitus makes sense, and Plato thinks he does, then there must be something at rest within the flux that allows us to detect it as change.
As flux, it's
in the first place. Okay. And perhaps that is what he meant by the Logos. Perhaps that is what the Logos is.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So I how does this tie in with Kierkegaard's point at the very end? That
so he's being super sarcastic against the Hegelians. What he's doing is he's basically just slamming the Hegelians again. By trying to go beyond Heraclitus, by trying to go beyond the river, you can never step into the same river twice. By making the conclusion even more fluxy, they actually didn't even get as far as Heraclitus got.
Right.
They just got back to, so therefore there is no change. And that was what Heraclitus was trying to argue against when he was arguing against Parmenides, the Eleatics.
Oh, so in saying that you're trying to surpass faith, you're getting somewhere that's even before faith itself.
Yep. By trying to go beyond faith, you just go before. You turn faith into some small tiny little thing, and you do less than you were before you tried to go beyond it.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
You take a massive step backwards, basically. By trying to go forwards, all you did was take a massive step backwards.
Okay. Cool. That clarifies it a lot. I had no idea what he was talking about.
Yeah. It's a cool, like, joke's not exactly the right word. Maybe slam. It's a very fun slam. But yeah, you do sort of have to go into all the like weird Heraclitus stuff to actually make sense of it.
Yeah.
So that was the slam. That was the one final slam at Hegel.
Okay.
That he was trying to do.
I was also wondering, really quick, what is a good point to pick up from Kierkegaard here? Obviously, I'm going to go back and reread all of Fear and Trembling just to get it all through. But after that, he has a lot of work. So what sort of picks up on this at least analysis of Christianity with Kierkegaard?
So what side of it are you more interested in? Are you more interested like in this explicitly the Christian side or in the leading to existentialism side?
The Christian side. Which seems to be like the less focused part of Kierkegaard.
That's the stuff at least I don't know as well. So I want to be full disclosure with it. Let me do a little research and I'll try to find let me try to find you a good follow-up. Because if you want the existentialist side, I know that one. That's including on scientific postscripts. That's where where he really goes in like what is this passion thing that he's talking about? That's where he really goes in that direction. Let me look and see though where the best place to go would be for him sort of further. Because what makes it so complicated is Kierkegaard didn't write Fear and Trembling. Johannes de Silencio wrote Fear and Trembling, and other pseudonyms attack Johannes de Silencio on occasion.
Oh, like Anticlimacus.
Anticlimacus, for example, who wrote Concluding Unscientific Postscript. I believe refers back to, and Anticlimacus is itself attacking another pseudonym because there was a pseudonym that was like Climacus the something or other, I'm forgetting. And so Anticlimacus is attacking that guy. And they're all Kierkegaard. So it makes the puzzle grow a little bit. But let me do a little research and see if I can find some good other directions to go within Kierkegaard.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. Then in that case, I'm gonna head out.
Awesome, sounds good. I'll see you next week or next class.
Yeah, sometime.
Bye.